Hello everybody, I'm Anna from Astral Tarot. I'm doing a VR today to Hanni from Fierce and Pretty Tarot channel. She made a hashtag, a really fun one, hashtag vintage tarot, yay or nay. Now I can tell you right off the bat, vintage tarot, yay. I thought this was just a fun video to make, to show you some of my favorite decks. And yeah, I don't know, let's just get into it. First, let's get this out of the way for a second. Some self-love September stuff going on. I'm doing that for myself. Hanni also made some very helpful questions for the tag. Number one question is, what is vintage for you? And that is a very good first question, because vintage technically, since we are in 2020, I think is the 90s. We should include the 90s, but of course that still is, you know, the 90s doesn't feel like a very long time ago for a lot of people, myself included. So if I were to incorporate the 90s, then I would have a lot more vintage decks. You know what? I'm just going to show you what I have that is, as far as I know, from the 90s. If you consider 90s decks vintage or 90s anything vintage, because to be honest, I'm not really sure. It's not vintage to me like the 70s decks, for instance. You know what I mean? But let's start with one of my favorites. One of the decks that I'm using for this month, I used the Wildwood, the Triomphe de la Luna Paradoxical, both contemporary modern decks, and then I also used, or still use, the Crow's Magic Tarot. Now this is definitely, you can even tell by the artwork, it's absolutely 90s. Here it says on the box, copyright 1998. Where's that deck? Oh yeah. In this little pouch here, because I've been traveling with it. This is definitely one of my favorites. It's definitely an oddball. I have a few videos with this deck featured in them. I mean, it's really strange. I feel lately that it's kind of reading more like a Rider-Waite-Smith, to be honest, than a Thoth, for instance. Some people say that this deck has a Thoth system, but I mean, apart from the Ace of Swords having the word thelema, which is Greek for will, in there, let me see if I can show you, and you know, strength being at 11, but that's also true for Marseille decks, so I'm not exactly feeling it to have a Thothy vibe. I'm not sure. Will I be able to find, I mean, I really like, it's such a weird deck, but here we go. Ace of Swords, keywords or title, powerful, dynamic, actually keywords I'd say, and here we have thelema in there, just like in the Thoth. But look at this one, for instance, the Six of Cups, which is one that I drew a few days ago for myself. The Six of Cups, and then the keywords past reminiscence. So that to me reads Rider-Waite-Smith, right? So it's kind of a mix of both. Here are the backs. Definitely love this deck. I'm very lucky to have found this because it's going for crazy prices, people keep telling me on eBay, and yeah. Thank you again to the person who wanted to sell me this deck. Here's another one. I made the box for it. Oh yeah, using this inside, which maybe doesn't fit Rider-Waite-Smith, but I really loved it. So this is a deck that definitely looks 70s, especially because of the backs. It's the Golden Rider, the French edition I have, but it is from the 90s. So this is just an artist that painted in, as you can see, very beautiful, different colors, painted all the cards, and I edged this one in, at the time, kind of like a dark gold or copper, because it says Golden Rider, but actually all the golden parts really are much more copper or dark gold. I really, really like it. I read with it often, even read with it for clients in the past. but you can tell there's a lot of foxing going on, a lot of tear, wear, wear and tear. But that is just because I appreciate this deck. I love this deck. It's hard to come by, I think, but I don't know. I got this one actually, I think I got this one new. I got this one shrink wrapped, and I was a little bit disappointed at the time when I got it because I thought, and it was advertised as the English version. I thought that I was getting the English version, which I think is worth more than the French version. But, I mean, I'm half French, and this is, I guess, my French Rider-Waite-Smith, so perfectly fine for me. I like to make 2-piece boxes for my decks sometimes, even though they move around in there a little bit more. It's just a nice feeling. This one is a 90s version of a deck, Tarot of a Moon Garden, which is my inner child deck, you could say, because I know that with these colors, with all these symbolisms, with all the moons and everything happening at night and stuff like that, as a kid, I definitely would have chosen this deck as my main one. I love this Ace of Swords. Oh my gosh, so beautiful. This one is definitely back in print. So, let's look at the copyright. 1993 US Games. Now, I don't remember if I ever held a modern printing of this deck, but I really, really like this US Games cardstock. Actually, so far, these are all US Games decks, but this one especially has that, well, it's quality cardstock for one, but it's also, it feels like, it feels buttery. I think that's what people mean. It feels like there's this texture, a layer on the cards that make them feel waxy, buttery, and in the best possible way. And I also feel why I like US Games cardstock often is because the deck has some weight. It feels like you can feel the core in there. You know, it's not just paper. It has a little bit of weight, and I like that. It's a tactile experience as well. Now, I love this one. It's very, I don't know, just an imaginary world, and I don't read with it a lot, but when I do, it's just, yeah, it just immerses the reader into this world of wizards and dragons and unicorns and butterflies, and look at these, the castle in the sky card, definitely. Yeah, love this one. Reversible backs. Again, made a 2-piece box for it, although, you know, the original box is quite beautiful. I still have that one. Next, for the 90s decks, version of the Halloween Tarot, I really like this. I blackened the borders front and back because I'm crazy, and then I edged the cards as well. I really love this deck, and I can't wait for October to kick in because I will then read with this one again. It's just so much fun, kind of like a guilty pleasure thing, but I get some deep messages from this deck still. So what is vintage for you? I tried explaining it. I'm not exactly sure. I think, well, showing all of these decks, I guess it's starting in the 90s. I am turning 33 in October. I don't know if that makes me a millennial or something along those lines, but technically 90s is vintage in 2020, right? Do you buy vintage or used decks? Absolutely. So the reason why I buy vintage decks, first of all, is because, so it's not true for every deck. For instance, Tarot of the Spirit in James Feeney's VR to this video, I had that heard before, that the Tarot of the Spirit new version has better cardstock, has better quality, has better images, has better focus and all that stuff. It's just better quality than the vintage version of that specific deck. I've heard that said before. So it's not always true that the cardstock is better in vintage decks, but I think that overall I do have a preference for thicker cardstock, so when that is the case for vintage decks, you see, it's just, yeah. I like thicker cardstock, I like papery cardstock, I like maybe even that the cards don't bend that much. I don't know. I'm with James. I'm not a fan of rose petal finish because I feel that most of the time it doesn't shuffle that well. But yeah, like he said, I think we have a lot in common. As he said, the older decks just tend to have this super good quality. So we can definitely say that I do like vintage decks. And why I like them, well, for one, for the cardstock, but two, also because it just, I'll be honest, it just feels more special. It just feels like you got a hold on of something that not a lot of people have, that not a lot of people maybe even appreciate. I'm talking about vintage and used decks. I do buy used decks. Actually, the Tarot of a Moon Garden, I bought used, and it's more of a used deck than vintage to me. But I don't know, I'm not a fan of throwing things away and then replacing them a few times in a lifetime. I prefer to buy something of quality, which is actually not even only about tarot, but about everything in life these days. I'd rather buy something that is of quality and that will last a lifetime or even more. And even not only on an environmental opinion stance. Of course, that counts a lot, but also just the idea. I like to be surrounded with things that are a little bit older, that have a history, a story. It doesn't even have to be that old, but I mean, you should see my house. Everything I bought at the thrift store, including all of my furniture and decoration. I think I own only 2 things in my entire house regarding furniture that are new. 1, shelves that I bought from IKEA, and 2, a table that looks old. So, and I just really like that. It's not just the idea of getting things for a bargain, for a steal. It's also just the feeling of, I said this before, I'm a part of its life, and instead of the other way around. It will outlive me, hopefully be appreciated by other people, or, you know, at least last me long enough. This is a hard question, honey. Back to tarot. So I do buy vintage or used decks for that reason. I don't like to throw things away. I like to appreciate things for a longer time. If it's not for me, then I prefer to sell it or give it away rather than throwing it away if it's still good for something. Oops, I knew I was going to do this. This is not vintage. 2012. It says on the box. It says 1996, 2012. So we've been answering questions, looking at a beautiful deck. A deck that I appreciate very much. Not vintage. Great. This might not even be the only mistake I make in this video, but just saying, it was fun looking at these cards, right? Anyway, why I like vintage decks is definitely because of that feeling that it is more special. It does feel more special to me. It feels exclusive. It feels like just like at the thrift store. Even if I buy a vintage deck online or used deck online, it's like I'm finding this treasure. It's not like I went to the store, knew what they had, bought a deck, which I must admit is fun as well. But it's just like, you know, it's more of a treasure hunt this way when you like vintage and used decks. There might, at the time of printing, have been a little bit less quality control, but overall, with the decks that I have, I feel that the quality is actually really, really good. Let's look at my favorite Thoth, which was my first Thoth. Well, the first Thoth that I bought. I was gifted a small Dutch version from the 90s, actually, also, but I don't have it handy here, but, you know. This is definitely an 80s greenie that came in the white Ordo Templi Orientis box. This is my favorite Thoth deck. I love it so, so, so much. It's absolute quality. Every card, and I have seen other greenies, not every card is in focus. Some cards are actually blurry, unclear, but this one, every card is clear. Every card is sharp, and I'm really, really lucky with that. It was a 80-something first printing. Wait, let me check the box. This is the box. Check the ISBN number if you want to get it for yourself. Let's see the little booklet that I just happen to have here. This is 1983 first edition, first printing. I was really lucky with this one. I got to unwrap this one from the cellophane that it still had on it. So no wear at all. All the cards in absolute mint new condition. The cardstock is amazing. It's thick. It's great. You know, no border on the back. I freaking love this deck. It's so beautiful. And this is mine. Yeah, I mean, you see, I really like this. I think a lot of people who don't like vintage decks or who don't like used or old decks would see this as a deficit or something like that, a fault in quality control, where, for instance, not every card is the same shade of green. Well, first of all, the whole green shade was a mistake. So it was a printing mistake. So there's the first thing that's wrong with this deck. But then also you can hopefully tell the Five of Cups is definitely more saturated in the borders, and then also probably the card, then over here the Six of Swords. So you see, but I love that. Those are little quirks that make these decks feel alive or something like that. I know that is a weird thing to say, but and then there's the thing that I also love, for instance, the image size. These are paintings from Lady Frida Harris, and you can tell, let's see, oh yeah, here for instance, this, the Prince of Discs, is, no wait, that's not a good example. Here, okay, 10 of Wands. You can definitely see that the image goes all the way to the green border, but then we look at the Six of Wands, and you can tell that the image is just a few millimeters smaller than this one, and doesn't quite reach the green border. But you know what? This is exactly the type of thing that I love. Now, I'm not exactly a fan. Look at how small Temperance is. Look at how much of a difference there is there. How much of a space. Definitely different. But I'm not so much of a fan of, for instance, what's the word? Like mistakes in texts. I'll put it in the screen if I remember how to say that. But all of this just makes it so good. And yeah, I don't know, it feels dynamic. It feels better, maybe even more organic in a sense. Because getting a new deck, I can say that because I have a new version of the Thoth, that, you know, a large green box. And comparing those two, comparing that one to this one, I mean, I definitely prefer this one for several reasons. I think I made it. Oh yeah, I definitely did make a comparison video. I'll link it below. But the new version to me, even though it's still beautiful, it's just a little bit boring. It's just all the same. It's not exactly, you know. I really like knowing my deck so well that I can just tell you off the top of my head that the Temperance art card is printed a little bit smaller within the border than all the other cards. Look at her. Oh. I love the green. There is just no way that you can get this wrong, but absolutely beautiful color scheme in new Thoth decks. This is just greeny goodness. Yeah, definitely fell in love with the green. And therefore, fell in love with Thoth. How amazing is that? I also have another Thoth deck that I bought to read with for clients, which is actually a 1978 greenie, which is printed differently. That is actually the comparison video that I made between this 1986 I think, version, and then the other, or wait, what is it? 1983 version, and the other 1978 version. So that's the video I'll link below, because that's the one that I made. Let's keep going. Let's look at the Elemental Tarot. Carolyn Smith, John Astral, they also made Oracle of the Radiant Sun, which, to be honest, I would have loved to have found a first edition, but you know, I had to do with the new version. Definitely doesn't feel as special, but I found a way to work with the cards, so that is what counts. This one is 1988, and actually I was pretty sure that this was a 90s deck, but apparently it's 80s, even though it's late 80s. So let's just look at these cards. Okay, here's the quality control thing. There are a lot of these types of cards. The printing is just really bad because it's so streaky. I'm not sure if you can see it. Look, this card is alright, but then this one is just, you can tell that the printer had some difficulties printing these ugly ass backs. And then there's also different shades, but that I do not mind. Okay, cardstock. Not wonderful, not bad. These cards don't have a core, I think. If you were to, yeah, definitely no core. If you were to put these with the backs towards you, up against a light or up against the window where the sun is shining through or light is coming through, you can see which card it is. That is definitely an old vintage thing. I also had an Albana Weight vintage one that I really disliked. For that reason, the cards were thin. The backs of the cards were matte, but then discolored, and then the front of the cards were all super glossy, so I passed it along. But you see, vintage isn't always better, so I think this deck is still being reprinted, and if you like the look of it, try the new one, because even though I really, really like the fact that this is a vintage version with the titles, this is the type font that I like. There's another version later with different font that I felt suited the deck a little bit not as well. And then I know that if the reprint is still happening, or if it already happened, I'm not sure, then these sentences that they added to the cards are all underneath the cards, just like an oracle deck. And I really like this, I don't know, the way that these cards are made, because here it's trickster, so which would be the magician or the magus, and it says, I am knowledge and I am ignorance, I am falsehood and I am truth. Pretty cool. Haven't worked with it nearly as much as I wanted to, but it will get the attention it needs, I'm sure. I really like the look of these cards. So that is all I have to say about this deck. Do you cleanse old decks is one of the questions. I do that thing where I put some decks in the windowsill when it's the full moon, but that's just rather because the full moon is reminding me that that is a way to cleanse decks. I'm not exactly a fan of the smell of Palo Santo. I'm not a fan of the smell of sage. So all of that I don't have or don't use really. I did though, and you will see it after this deck, I did years ago cleanse a deck by putting it into incense. Now that was definitely a vintage deck from the 70s. The Moroccan Fez, the Royal Fez Moroccan Tarot deck. Absolutely 70s, no, what's that called? But that was the problem. I should never have done that, because finally this year the smell has gone out of these cards. But because the deck was so old, so unused for so long, and these cards, they are definitely more papery, it's just, they just absorbed that, not even the smell of the incense, the smell of the smoke of the incense. So after I had done that, I definitely regretted it, because I had to air out this deck basically for 3 whole years or something like that, because it smelled like I had bought it off a heavy smoker, and nobody likes that. Shuffle cards and then, no, doesn't smell good. So that is a reason why I don't use smoke to cleanse decks anymore. Or when I cleanse decks, new or vintage or used or whatever, it's definitely just because it's the full moon, and that's an easy way to do it. That's an easy way to even just, have the deck out, air it out, and then, why not in the full moon? Why not? Yeah. It's not something that I really, really think about. So I don't really feel that it's necessary. So yeah, definitely love this deck. As you can see, it's a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. Beautifully drawn. I got it pretty new, really good condition. It was my own fault that the deck smelled like smoke for 3 years. There is no little white book, but there was somewhere a card, well, with the titles of the cards. For instance, 2 of Wands would be Dominion, so Lord of Dominion. But I really wanted this deck, and I was so lucky to find it for a steal. It doesn't have any titles. It doesn't have any, the cards don't have any words on them at all. This is the World card or the Universe card, and it just says 21. And I really like that. Even the court cards, I'm sure you've seen some. You see? I really just like that aspect of, there's just a little bit more mystery as to which card it is. This is a deck that didn't have a box. It came in one of those large ones. This is the original Mythic Tarot. This is the copyright 1986 version. I also have this book, and where is it? The workbook for it. I don't know where I put this one now, but anyway, this is definitely one of those cases of beautiful, wonderful artwork. Absolutely had to have it. I traded a vintage Dutch black and white Rider-Waite-Smith for this one. Definitely do not regret it. Don't read with this one nearly as much. But yeah, it's gorgeous, but the cardstock is so thin. It's just not even cardstock, it's paper stock. But I definitely prefer this one over the new Mythic Tarot, at least, the artwork. I can recommend this deck to anyone, even the new Mythic Tarot, because I think the book hasn't changed. Definitely one of my favorites, if not my favorites, books to learn the Rider-Waite-Smith system with, because it includes the Greek myths, and this was just such a fun read. It read like a look at these old pages. It read like a novel, and at the same time I learned so much. And I want to reread this one, but right now Thoth has my attention, and the Kabbalah and all that stuff, but I recommend this one to everyone. Another question of the tag is, do you use vintage decks or just collect? I definitely do not just collect. I read with every single deck I own, even with this beauty, the blue box Rider-Waite-Smith. This is a Blushing Fool. I also got this one for a crazy low price. This one is 1972. First published 1910, this edition 1972. And yeah, I love this one. No copyright. Yes, thank you very much. Same with Thoth and all that stuff. No copyright. That's another reason. Thank you for reminding me. 10 of Swords in the blue box. That is another reason why I like vintage decks. This cardstock is amazing. Okay, fine. No core in them, I believe, but it's really good. No lamination. Colors are perfect. Well, perfect. He is a little bit red in the face, but you see muddy, typically muddy cards, not muddy at all, absolutely clear, crystal clear, and original Pixies font. Yeah, only good things actually about this one. You can tell even the backs, they were cut from a large sheet, so that's another reason why it feels more organic, because it's not the digitally printed the way that we would get a yellow box, the equivalent kind of thing of the Rider-Waite-Smith these days. You can see here, can you see that? There's a line, just because it was all cut. And I think I don't know, the cutter had maybe a little thing in the way, I don't know. But yes, so good, absolutely no lamination, feels amazing, and it's all crystal clear. And yeah, all very sharp lines, and it definitely is such an amazing good printing. And the Fool, this one is a blushing fool. Don't know if you can see, but that was a printing mistake. And now these are worth more. So it's not just the worth for me, because I actually prefer to read with my Centennial Rider-Waite-Smith than the blue box, but it's just the fact that it's special. So it's not that it costs more, it's that it's worth more, and it's not that it's worth more, it's that it's more special to me. Or at least, maybe this one is a little bit of a collector's item, I'll be honest, because I don't read with it nearly as much as I do with my Centennial, as I said. I forgot this one. This is a two-piece box by A.G.M. Mueller, 1998, copyright of Soul Cards 1. And my god, these are gorgeous. Look at the cards, look beautiful. They are matte. The cardstock is thinner, but definitely more durable than the Soul cards that we can buy today in, you know, readily available. I have to admit, I prefer Soul Cards 2, which I have a modern version of because Soul Cards 2 never came out in this version. But I want to trade this one, sell this one. I don't know. I feel guilty for not reading with it, because I mean it's just ready for you to appreciate this version of this cool deck. And please, if you want them, I'm in the Netherlands. Let me know. I am picky with what decks I own, but just look at the coloration. It looks amazing, and it's so good to not have that annoying reflection all the time. It's just much more, it feels much more like the painting. So, there you go. That's my last 90s deck. What is my favorite vintage deck? Without a doubt, my Thoth Greenie, because I actually read with it a lot. This feels like lucky four-leaf clover because it's green, and you know, at the time of getting the Rider-Waite-Smith blue box with the Blushing Fool, that one felt like my lucky deck, but now I feel that this one definitely took first place because I read with it all the time, and my god, is it different with these colors, with the greenie. Especially, you know, I have an especially green greenie, so love that. It's definitely green, blue, my colors. So definitely my favorite vintage deck that I own. Although you have seen I'm lucky to own quite a few gems. Alright, a dream vintage deck. I wouldn't mind seeing what a El Gran Tarot Esoterico looks like in the two-piece box. I think that is very interesting. The Picard minors are what draw me towards that deck. I'm not sure about the whole Suit of Swords being water and Suit of Cups being air. I made a video about that. But apart from that, you know, it's just, oh, those minors are gorgeous, and I wouldn't mind stumbling upon that deck in the two-piece box. What else? Oh yeah, James showed the Masonic Tarot, which is Le Tarot Masonique. It looks absolutely gorgeous, absolutely special. Wouldn't mind owning that one. Oh yeah, I would love to have, I'll be very specific here, a mini vintage Albano Waite. Because I had an Albano Waite, a 90s version, too blurry for me, sold it. I had a 60s something Albano Waite that I talked about in this video, horrible cardstock, looked horrible, passed it along. And I saw, but those prices are crazy, I cannot afford that, you know, for yet another Rider-Waite-Smith. But I am crazy about the Albano Waite colors, and I figure maybe if I get a small one, it will be, you know, different enough for me to actually use it. It won't be just another Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, you know what I mean? And I think that the small ones maybe have better cardstock than the vintage normal tarot-sized one I had a few years ago. So that is also my dream vintage deck. Right now, I'm not sure. I mean, I acquired Crow's Magic Tarot this year. I acquired Elemental Tarot this year. Both of those were on my wish list for a long time. I definitely wouldn't mind owning a gold slidey box, blue border Thoth, the muddy one. But that would be for collectors' purposes rather than reading. I'm definitely a reader. I read with my cards, but I also hold on to, for instance, the Rider-Waite-Smith blue box, even though I know I definitely prefer the Centennial version, which is readily available today. So there's a little bit of a, maybe I'm a little bit of a collector, but mostly still I read with my cards. So off the top of my head, those are the dream vintage decks, and I have to get to work. So thank you so much for watching. This was a very fun hashtag. I hope I did it justice. I hope I didn't forget anything. Sorry about that mistake I made about the Halloween tarot, but I just really like that deck. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all in the next one.